let's go. Thank you guys again. Okay, let's go e4 this time. We already gone. We went d4 a couple times. Anu 5 gifted. Oh, thank you, Anu. And okay, I'm going to play an opening. Thank you so much, Anu. Vorticity. I'm going to play the c3 Sicilian, which I actually highly recommend to people in the 1700-1800 rating range. Oh, holistic hamster. I don't even know what to say. And we're going to transpose the game into the advanced French, which I'm hoping my opponent doesn't play. Dead man D for the sub. And the move a6 already signals to me that my opponent isn't at home in this opening, because this is kind of a pointless move, right? We weren't going to really develop our bishop to b5 anyway, and there's no special way in which to play this position. We simply need to develop our pieces. Thank you, Anu. Thank you, guys. We simply need to develop our pieces. Where should this bishop go? Where should this bishop go? We're over 4,600. I can't believe this. Yeah, of course, d3 is the classic square. Oh, John is in the chat. Okay, so c4 closes the position entirely. Of course, we'll keep the bishop on this diagonal, and we will simply continue our development. We don't have to worry about him going b4 because he's not really very well developed. Now, this is a closed position. A lot of people struggle with these kinds of positions, and I really want to delve into how to play these positions. So I'm going to make a couple moves here without really explaining them, and I'm going to explain them properly after the game. But the basic idea is to identify the side of the board where we're going to attack. And of course, that's going to be the king side in the center. And we need to figure out ways for us to get pieces onto squares where they can be prepared when the center opens. Now, if we look at this knight on d2, where I want to get it is actually h5. If the knight lands on h5 and he goes g6, he's going to get checkmated on f6. How should we get that knight to h5? We go rook e1. Very typical idea, actually. I can show you many games that feature this idea. We go rook e1, and then we slowly begin the transfer of the knight to h5. Some of you might be looking at this and saying, well, isn't this too slow? Well, that's why we allow ourselves to do this, because the position is closed. He's not even really open. This actually helps us, because the bishop now has very nice access to this square. Another 5 subs from Anu. Thank you so much, Anu. I really appreciate it. And guess what he's just done? He has allowed us to open up the position. Knight takes f5. And now a very, very important move. Very, very important move. What move am I talking? Oh, first, let's go bishop a4. And then after he covers the knight, very important move. A very thematic e6. Opening up the center. Guess what? Look at how our rook is positioned. Look at how our bishop is positioned. Now it's time to reap the rewards. We take on c6. And now there's several things that we can do. One is to take on e6, which is the obvious move. But somehow after king d7, he stays in the game. We can also just position our knight to e5. And in addition to threatening the bishop, what does this move accomplish? What is our secondary threat here? And that's really what's going to devastate him, because he cannot cover both things at once. That, of course, is queen h5 check, followed by either a fork or a queen infiltration to f7. That's going to be absolutely deadly for black. So this is going to be crushing. And he either has to try to cover that, or, yeah, so he's covered the bishop, but now we can go queen h5. And remember, I always remind people that, well, actually, we're so spoiled for choice here. We can play knight g6 and win his rook. Well, let's go for the big money here. Let's go for a very nice, ooh. Let me think for a second. Yeah, so we have several ways to checkmate him here. Could somebody propose an attacking move here? Yep, so a lot of you guys are seeing this. We want to put the bishop on f4. Bishop f4 would win the game on the spot because it would set up a discovered check. But let's first take on c4 so that we can then go bishop f4 with check. And that's going to send his king further into the center, and then we can take on e6 with checkmate. Very simple stuff. No need to go crazy. Okay. And the game is over. So he resigns. If he had gone e5, bishop e5 would be made. Thank you, Joe Nathan, gifting to Inoxeria. And continues. Okay. We had another sub there I missed from someone. So, since this is probably a last speedrun game for today, let's look at it in depth. Now, where did he mess up? Right. So, this is called the Alapin Sicilian. I played this opening until I was about 1900, and then I played it several more times as a GM. It's gotten very popular even at the GM level. The idea is very straightforward. You want to go d4. You want to go d4 and occupy the center, which is the oldest trick in the book, and black has to do something about it. So our opponent decided to transpose into a French, which a lot of people don't realize they're doing. So e6 is not the best way to play for people who don't play the French. Black's main two moves are knight f6 and d5, both of which are very thematic because black tries to counter-strike in the center before white gets a chance to play d4. There's a lot of theory there. I won't go into it, but basically that's the bottom line here. There's plenty of places to study the Alapin, but I recommend it because it's so thematically strong, right? Very classical opening. Now this is the advanced French, and the move a6 is simply a waste of time, which allows us to continue developing. And the main continuation in the French, as we've already seen several times, is to quickly apply pressure on this crucial pawn on d4, try to get it to take on c5, and that would basically cause my central pawn chain to collapse. That's why in the French, black often does this in order to put maximal pressure on the pawn on d4. Now, our opponent decided to close up the center entirely without developing any of his pieces. So this already is quite dubious for black, even though it might not seem that way, right? It might seem like black is completely fine. And this is a little bit hard for me to sort of verbalize, but the reason that white is better here is largely because of the space advantage and because of the pawn on e5. If you guys look at this pawn very carefully, what squares does this pawn control? It controls these two squares. If a knight ever lands on one of those two squares, black is going to be completely lost, and there's no equivalent idea, so black is very cramped. This knight is nowhere good to go. It went to f5 in the game, and you saw what happened. So black is super cramped. White's got all these attacking ideas, and that's partially why we bring our knight all the way to h5. So if he plays f6, that's the other thing. The moment he opens up the center, we see the huge disparity in how my pieces are positioned versus how his pieces are positioned. That's like the nerdiest reference ever. I don't know why I came up with this, but do you remember when in Star Wars, I think Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul are fighting, and then I think Darth Maul forces, I don't know the terminology, but there's a force field, and there's a 5-minute period where they're not fighting. They're waiting for the force field to open back up. I don't know if anybody knows the reference. But basically, the way to think about this position is like that fight. I'm Darth Maul. Okay, I liked Qui-Gon Jinn, but you get the point. So eventually, the center is going to open. That's just how it's going to be. Rarely do you have an entire game with the center being closed. And when the center opens, I'm going to be better prepared because my pieces are better placed. I'm the better, handler of the lightsabers. So in particular, I'm applying pressure on e6, and now I can still get the knight to h5. And that's basically the way to think about that. I don't know if this makes any kind of sense, and it's quite general. But basically, that's the reason why it's so hard to play these positions for black. The moment the center opens, which happens here, my pieces just stream in, e6 happens, it all plays itself. He's got all these weak squares, and his king is just very unprotected because he's made all these holes in his position by pushing all these pawns out. Okay, he shouldn't have gone knight f5. That was his decisive mistake. Probably knight g6 would have been better. Thank you, King Cookie, for the sub, and Bandadad gifting a sub as well. Of course, I could have taken here and attacked this pawn, but it's not quite as bad as in the game because the center remains relatively closed. Now, there was no way to stop bishop a4. This square is very well protected by white. e6 is super thematic, right? Breaking through, sacrificing the pawn in order to open up the position and get my pieces on key squares. Remember that when you push a pawn, the square in front of the pawn can be occupied oftentimes very effectively by a piece. Can you go through taking advantage of a hole? Well, that's actually a very, very important concept. The concept of pushing out a pawn and then occupying the square that has been created as a consequence of that. I can show you guys many, many very good illustrative games on that specific topic. One comes to mind immediately. Since I got the question, let me find that game. It's not a famous game, but I've always enjoyed showing it to students because of how thematic it is. So watch what white does in the following position. I'm just going to set up, sorry, one sec. Going to set this up on chess base. Thank you, Rekwar, for the prime. And the subs continue. Okay. So we need to do this. And we need to do this. Rowson against Bates. So I saw this game, I think, in a book by Scottish Grandmaster Jonathan Rowson, who is one of my favorite really one of my favorite authors. He wrote several very interesting books on like chess psychology. The following position was reached in a game between Jonathan Rowson and this guy Richard Bates this was 1997. So in this position, Rowson did something very, very thematic and very, very instructive. The first thing that comes to mind if you look at this position, thank you Human for the bits, is the fact that black has this bishop on f6, which is super strong. It's controlling the long diagonal. So Rowson wants to shut this bishop down. How does he do it? Can you guys apply the concept that we just talked about? Pushing out a pawn and then occupying the square left behind. Bingo. Bingo. Literally by the book. Now there's a tactical component to this, because if black tries to take f4, notice that the queen is overloaded. It's guarding two pieces at once. We take on f6, we take on e8, and we're up a rook. So black has to move his bishop out, and then how do we now close the gates on Mr. Bates? So that, okay, that I promise I didn't think of that beforehand. How do we close the gates on Mr. Bates? We go f5, and now the knight on e4 is completely unassailable. Look at this beautiful outpost. White's got the pressure down the f-file, and Rowson wins the game just by crushing him down the f-file. Yeah, so he plays a nice attacking game here. We won't look at the rest of the game in detail, but the attack is absolutely devastating here. Okay, so nicely done. Yeah, so does this make sense? F5, E5, knight E4. So basically, I even did this on the same exact file. The E file, it's just that the E5 square was the one involved here, not the E4 squares in the Rowson games. Knight E5, Queen H5, Queen F7. We could have also won the rook here. That would have been completely fine. And now this move is good because it sets up a discovered mate. But we decided to make the second move first. And he resigns because, well, not because of this. Queen takes E6 would have been checkmate. Okay. One sec. Sorry, was something off here? Thank you, Dropkick John with a prime. Does this make sense? Does this make sense? Or does anybody have any questions, in other words? Yes, perfect. So once again, the C3 Sicilian, I would highly recommend people consider this if you're 1300, 1400. It was basically the first type of Sicilian that I actually played. Okay, so obviously I want to play some Blitz, but we've still got over 5,000 viewers. So I would not be against one last one to round off today's speedrun. Okay, and again, I want to make it very clear that, okay, I think I know where the people stand on this. For what? It's good to see people in agreement. I think we need a little bit more of that, and we have 5 more subs from Curious Chimpanzee. Keeps the train going. 24 hours a day. Thank you, Curious Chimpanzee. Another 5 gifted, and followed by 100 bits. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Over 4,600. Inzo 24 with a prime. Doom is on fire. And Flailing Fanatical Killer. Man, this is just remarkable. Okay, just give me a moment. Just give me a moment. So basically, Grant Carden continuing in the Goonie 132 with a prime. Yeah, we are approaching 100K subs on YouTube as well, so thank you guys for that. Zoldor Z with 1,000 bits. Thanks for such an instructive series. Very happy that you're enjoying it. Awesome. Thank you for the 1,000 bits, man. All right, one last one here. Have I heard anything about PogChamps 3? No, I have actually not, but we will see. I'm hopeful. Okay, 6. Okay. Everybody ready? What is your goal dream with the stream path? Before I go on, actually no real goal. I mean, again, I've only been doing this for about 8 months full time, so I will continue to balance teaching, streaming, playing. Very ambitious stuff, but we'll see. You know, now streaming has taken off, so I've been doing more of that. But basically, I'm doing it day by day. I have no long-term plan. I just want to keep putting out entertaining and instructive content, and that's all I could possibly ask for. So this is just the beginning. You know, there's a lot more stuff that I want to do and that I want to develop myself in, and you know, this is just the opening salvo. Okay, let's go. Thank you, and appreciate your support, man. Okay, so we're black against Dion Reyes, and let's go with another Sicilian. Let's see if we can. Okay, so c4 is not a great move. Because it weakens, and we've already faced this move once, it weakens the d4 square, which we can of course occupy by developing our knight. And if we're thinking about where to develop this bishop, should we proceed with g6 as if this were an accelerated dragon? Should we do that? Yes, or should we instead maybe get the bishop? Yeah, absolutely we should, because that's conducive to the fact that we are now controlling the d4 square with even greater strength. So oftentimes you have to decide, are we sticking to the main sort of the main setup? And oftentimes the answer is yes. Now, if you guys remember, the last time we faced this, I made a point about where to develop this knight. One possibility, thank you Wheels for the prime, is to develop it to f6. But the counter argument to that would be the fact that that knight would then block the bishop's control of the d4 square. And I pointed out previously that this knight can sometimes go to e7. This looks a little bit weird, but this is actually a very typical setup, which we are going to adopt in order to let this bishop keep d4 under control. In fact, let's reap the rewards of that. We're going to put that knight on the outpost, and we can support it with the other knight. That's part of the reason why I really like this. Look at now our two knights, both of them guarding each other. And now we simply need to add some Tabasco sauce. Okay, how should we, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, we haven't completed our development. Before we jump the gun on anything, let's castle to make sure our king is safe. And now we have several ways to proceed. And this is not an easy position to play well in. Overrated, thank you for the prime. So one possibility is to go f5 and try to open the position up. And the logic behind that is that we have a beautiful knight on d4. We have better placed pieces than our opponent. And as we've talked about on many occasions, when we have better placed pieces than our opponent, it's often time to open up the center. This is a risky strategy because we're doing it in front of our own king. But remember, he's also pushed out his pawn to g4, which has created for us a hook. How can we now attack this hook with one of our pieces? Very logical. This is how you attack. We can attack this pawn on g4 by deploying what piece? Boom. Now he can push that pawn even further. He does, but he continues to overextend himself. And when I say overextend himself, what I mean is that his pawns are going to be a lot harder to defend if we can find a way to strike. And you guys have found a way to strike with the move e5. You know, we're trying to shatter his defenses. This is a very risky strategy that I'm adopting here. It might backfire. I don't think it will, but it might, because we're also weakening, you know, I'm also weakening my position. But if you can see, this knight on d4, we're already reaping the rewards of that because knight f3 was a huge threat. And, well, what should we do now? King h2 is not a good move. He's sort of lost the thread of the game here. And the reason is because he's weakened himself to such an extent that now his pawns, well, we don't need to go knight f3. There's no need for that. We can simply play e takes f4. That pawn's going to go all the way to f3. It's going to send this bishop back. And then we're going to have queen h3. Once again, it's one of those situations where there's no need to go for something crazy. We can simply take the free pawn, recapture with the knight. Now, aren't we allowing him to remove that knight from the board? Well, we are. But look at the dark squares now around his king. In fact, we don't have to take back immediately, although probably we should. We could have also given a check first. But his king is completely cornered, so we're threatening queen h4. That's basically checkmate in 2 moves. Yep, and his king cannot escape to g1. So you can see how quickly his position collapsed because he just moved too many pawns out in front of his king. And that ends the game. Basically, very simple and logical strategy that we adhere to. Now, c4 is not such a bad move if white knows how to follow it up, but he didn't do it very well. Bishop g7. Now, this is called the Botvinnik setup, e6, right? Once again, the reason that that we don't go knight f6, so the knight f6 would be completely fine, is because we relinquish partly our control over the d4 square. The bishop is now not very happy, so we find an alternate arrangement for the knight. It rents an Airbnb, you know, instead of the bishop doesn't want a roommate here. So we let the bishop keep its control over the d4 square, And here my opponent missed perhaps his biggest chance to get out of the situation. What should white have done here to rid himself of his main weakness? Thank you, Evan, for the 11 months. Appreciate it. And the subs just keep on going. Yeah, he should have gone d4 himself, just absolving himself of the weakness. Now our pieces are very nicely... I like this position for black because my pieces are super harmonious. The knights are linked. But, you know, he can develop and we get sort of an accelerated dragon kind of position. Thank you for the 100. Probably about 50% with Alireza over the years. I could try queen b6 here, but it's not the same thing. I like your thinking, though, Demon. Here's the main difference. Notice the bishop on e3. In that accelerated dragon trap, right, Demon, the bishop was unprotected. So here he has complete freedom over to where to move his knight. He can go to b3, and it's not that queen b6 is that bad, but it could be a little bit more risky because that bishop is protected. Okay, comparison is a very powerful tool to understand position. Now, by the way, we're threatening checkmate here. So that's the consequences of weakening squares like this. And now the key move f5, right? Opening up the position, using this pawn as a hook. And a hook is any pawn that's been advanced in front of a king. And he should have probably... Yeah, he's already in a tough spot here. I think white is worse. I don't really see a good move for him. Maybe he should have taken here and maybe tucked his king away, you know, something like this. But I mean, this is already very difficult. And now we just get our queen in and boom, e5, striking, weakening his position even further, opening up our bishop, all in the name of the attack. And you guys might be looking at this move and saying something smells wrong, right? We're weakening the d5 square. Yes, we are, but we're also weakening all of these squares in front of his king. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And this is a very good epitome of that. So queen to g4, threatening a fork because his bishop is pinned. Now we simply take the pawn. He takes on d4. He weakens all the dark squares in front of his king, although his position's already hopeless because f3 was being threatened. And, of course, this is a very simple checkmate. The king cannot come back to g1 because the bishop controls this square. What about bishop g5 of pinning our queen? Well, I'm not sure in which position you're referring to. The 7 Deadly Chess Sins and Chess for Zebras, as weird as that sounds, are both fantastic books on chess psychology. Please explain the prophylaxis of moving the king to the corner. Yeah, so why did I say, what is the purpose of the move king h1? Why did I say that this is what white should do? Great question. Well, basically, there's no mystery behind this move. Tucking the king to h1 makes it a little bit safer. Why? Because the king is no longer on the g file. And the g file is one of the main arteries toward the king, right? You could see even in the game, we put our queen on g4, the king's on the g file, and so we threaten moves like knight f3. So king h1 would preemptively get rid of various ideas related to the g file, and in addition, he would try to turn this back around on me and put a rook on g1 and start to attack me down the g file. So king h8 would be a very sensible response here. Both kings are now relatively safe for the time being because they're covered by this pawn. They're not permanently safe. They're not safe in a global sense, but at least there's no immediate checkmate and there's no immediate attack. So that's why I think, and that's why people often play king b1 when they castle long, just to tuck the king away to a slightly safer square, to make it harder for the opponent to get the attack started, okay? And in chess, there's different types of moves. There's a time to attack, there's a time to defend, and there's a time to make moves like king h1. I know people don't like to play these moves, but you have to, right? That's what makes chess such a complex and beautiful game. You have to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and make things difficult for your opponent. And often that requires making slow moves like king h1 to, make your king incrementally more safe so that you have more time to accomplish your agenda. Okay, let's go e4. And he plays a French. So let's play another... Oh, no, he doesn't play the French. Let me slap your king. He plays d6. So this could be a bunch of different things. He might be trolling us. He might be playing the hippo. In any case, it's a good idea to just develop our pieces and wait for him to show what he wants to do. Now, earlier, my strategy was to just develop as quickly as possible. But now we're a little bit higher rated. So we can take a bit of a bigger chunk of the center. I can show you guys how to do this responsibly, right? Now, you don't want to do stuff like g4, right? When you take a big chunk of the center, you want to make sure that then you develop your pieces quickly, and you develop them with an eye toward defending the central pawns. So right now we're just developing our pieces, and we are preparing for the proper moment to strike in the center. Look how passively he's developed. Okay, so this is the last straw. Because now we've developed most of our pieces, we have a huge center, and just logically speaking, good night Aquila, logically speaking, it is time for us to strike. What does that mean? What does it mean to strike in the center? What specific move am I looking to make? There's actually two different moves that both accomplish the same thing. Yeah, e5 is the classical method of striking. Then f5 was the other move. We can play that on the next move. If he plays d5 to close up the center, which is a very common response, we play f5, and before he gets a chance to breathe, there we go. We go f5, and he is going to get it. I mean, he's going to get destroyed here if he's not careful. Okay, so, well, we should take on e6, open up the position even further. If he takes, yeah, he takes correctly with the queen. But he's done a very good job here of avoiding immediate disaster, but he's still in very big trouble. Now let's play this methodically. This queen on e6, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I want to get this queen out of here. I can't go knight g5 because that pawn controls the square. How can we orchestrate a maneuver to get rid of this queen on e6 while also involving one of our pieces which perhaps isn't doing as much now? Good job, knight e2, knight f4. Another benefit of this move is that we free up the c-pawn, which can be used as a battering ram to destroy the rest of his center. So let's get rid of the queen. And now he's castled long, which means we should immediately draw our attention to his king and ask ourselves, how can we get to this king? What are the specific weaknesses on his queen side? And by that I mean we should be looking at pawns, and I look at the a6 pawn and I say, ooh, that's kind of weak. Let's attack the pawn while bringing our queen into the game. We're also keeping, ooh, okay, I don't think that, this is kind of passive, so you only live once. Let's go e6. Let's strike in the center again. Now, what square? And we get a chance to apply a principle. What square have we created for one of our pieces? When you push a pawn in the center, you create the e5 square. Now, a move like f6 clearly introduces tremendous weaknesses in his position. What specific square can we occupy? Not e5. Of course, he's defended that square. But in doing so, what has he fatally weakened? Oh, crunch. I mean, look at these squares. We win his rook. He has nowhere to go. Bishop g6 would not have been the same because then he can move his queen. That's still winning for white, but this simply wins material. He can't even get a knight for the rook. He's in tremendous trouble here. The position is, it's over. It's completely over. We just take a full rook, and we've retained, and the knight, and we win the other rook. His other rook also has no squares because of the pawn on e6. This is quite a comical position. We don't even have to take on d8. That's the hilarious thing. And that's the thing that some people don't always understand, is we don't even have to rush with capturing on d8 because his rook is not going anywhere. So let's first reinforce our pawn on d4, build a little pawn chain. We could have also taken on a6. I actually forgot that pawn was hanging. We should have done that, but it doesn't matter. We're up so many pieces. Okay, now we should take on d8 because he wanted to go rook c8. And now we can play bishop takes a6 and win another pawn. Now we want to be careful about, as I've explained many times, about over-grabbing pawns in such a situation. We've gotten enough. Now we can go about winning the game. Evil Ferret, thank you for the sub. Now let's not forget what our initial plan was. What was our initial plan with the move queen e2? We were trying to attack the king side, the queen side. So let's continue attacking the queen side. How can we do that? We need to do that by pushing up our pawns and opening up files, preferably the a file, so that eventually our queen could land on a6. In order to do that, we have to employ a very typical strategy. Okay, he's also attacking, but he just doesn't have any pieces left. Let's just sack on b5 because we're up a rook and an exchange, so we can afford to sacrifice an exchange. We shouldn't take on d5 because that walks into a discovery. There are several ways of winning this game. We could go queen d7 and simply trade queens because we're up a rook. But there's no need to do that. Let's take on a5 and threaten checkmate. So see, here it's a judgment call. You can absolutely, the simple thing to do, and I think people don't do enough, when you're up a rook and you're up a million pawns, just trade queens so you won't give checkmate in this game. That's okay, you're going to win the game. We play to win the game. Okay, so how should we exploit the undefended knight on f5? A very typical discovery, and he loses everything here. Okay. I'm sure we had some sort of a checkmate, but why not simplify when we know that this is going to guarantee the win? Let's cement the rook. And now we're going to focus on creating a passed pawn, as we always do in this situation. In fact, he's done it for us. Always, you know, nothing surprising. Now look at the b pawn. That pawn's going to win the game. We play to win the game. Okay, we're not going to give up anything here. I'm feeling greedy. But before we do anything, let's first bring our king in. See, I know I'm being pedantic here, but I want to just re-emphasize how important it is to adhere to endgame principles, regardless of the position that you have on the board, because that helps you retain them when the position is more competitive. So we're going to bring the king in, then we're going to centralize the bishop, and only then are we going to start pushing our passed pawn. Glad to hear that, XR. In fact, he's just busted because we don't even need this passed pawn. We're just going to vacuum up all of his other pawns. The game is over. Yeah, Herm Edwards. Yeah, exactly. Okay, he resigns. Okay, so a relatively simple game because our opponent just played super passively in the opening. Textbook move e5 followed by f5, ripping open the center. And after f takes c6, if he would have taken with the f pawn, what would we have done here to capitalize on the center being opened? So bishop g6 is correct. That's a very important check. That's also why just like pushing random pawns is such a bad idea. Now, some people are asking, how did I decide on e5? And this is kind of this is not a science, right? d5 would be fine. But the thing is, if you look at the c7 square, right? If you think about why you would go d5, this e7 square is very well defended by black. So he could try to quickly sneak in castles. They don't really want to let black castle, okay? So d5 would have been possible as well. Okay, so here we go knight e2 to chase the queen away. Okay, knight f4, queen e2, identifying the weaknesses. If he plays a move such as b5, how should we have gone about breaking down this pawn chain? We should go a4. That hurts like hell, because if he takes, then he opens up this. If he goes c6, then we can just slam it on b5, and this king is just going to be demolished here. So that's basically the way to attack here. Instead, he goes knight b8, allows this move. Now, if he would have taken on e6, we could have gone knight e5, but we could have also just gone knight g6 quite like in the game, because his rook is gone. And look at this move h6. That basically cost him the game. Well, not only that, but that was among the things that that exacerbated the situation. That's why you should be very careful, as I said earlier, about these random pawn pushes, unless you have a good reason to do so. Bishop g6 here would have also been possible. We could have gone after his queen, but the simple approach is just to win a bunch of material and win more material and more material, then open up the position by sacking. And here, of course, making the simple decision to trade queens and capitalize on this huge material advantage. Once again, you remain tactically vigilant until the very end of the game. That's just part of the reason that chess is so brutal. You can lose a queen just like that after playing a brilliant game. It's happened to me a million times. You let your guard down for a second, and you can manufacture a comeback with very limited resources, which is why you must be vigilant. You must respect your opponent, and you can never pretend that you've won the game or write 1-0 on your score sheet before the game is actually over, because this kind of stuff happens.